The Saka Empire. Nomads who shaped ancient India. History loves a good story about a flashy empire, one that leaves behind giant monuments and a name everyone remembers. But what about the other empires? The ones that didn't just rise and fall, but instead melted into the cultures they helped create, changing them from the inside out. Deep in Central Asia, a different kind of power was building, a nation on horseback, a people of the endless steppe, whose destiny would eventually lead them to the plains of India. This was a collision of civilizations that would change the subcontinent forever. Imagine the vast windswept grasslands of Eurasia. A storm is gathering, but it's not made of clouds. It's made of people. They have no stone cities, no fixed borders. Their homes are their saddles, and their empire is the horizon. These are the Saka, a nomadic people known to the Greeks as the Scythians. When a rival power forced them out of their homeland, they didn't just fade away. They swept south, clashing with the Greek kingdoms left behind by Alexander the Great and pouring into the vibrant, chaotic world of ancient India. But this wasn't just a raid. It was the beginning of a new dynasty, a forgotten empire that challenged the great powers of its day and left a deep and lasting mark on India. So how did a confederation of nomadic warriors manage to forge an empire and create a legacy that's still with us? This is the story of the Saka, the nomadic conquerors who became Indian kings. The steppe storm gathers. The story of the Saka doesn't start in India. It begins on the massive plains of Central Asia. As part of the broader Scythian world, they were absolute masters of the nomadic lifestyle, a people whose entire society revolved around the horse and the bow. Their world was one of fierce tribal loyalties, built for constant movement and sudden warfare. For centuries, they thrived in this fluid, often violent landscape of competing tribes. But in the 2nd century BCE, the power dynamics on the steppes completely shifted. To their east, a powerful tribal group, the Xiongnu, started expanding and pushed out their neighbors, the Yuezhi. This kicked off a massive domino effect. The Yuezhi fled west, and in the process, they shoved the Saka right out of their ancestral lands. Ancient Chinese records, like the Han Shu, actually describe this chaotic period, telling us how the king of the Sai, that's the Chinese name for the Saka, was forced to lead his people south. This wasn't a single organized invasion. It was a messy, sprawling migration. Pushed from their homes, different groups of Saka moved in waves, first into the Greco-Bactrian kingdom, the last piece of Alexander's empire in the east, and then toward the mountain passes of the Hindu Kush. They weren't just refugees, they were hardened warriors, carrying a military tradition perfected over generations on the steppe. Their journey was far from over. In fact, they were about to build a new center of power for themselves. The invasion and conquest, as the Saka streamed through the high mountain passes into modern-day Afghanistan and Pakistan, they entered a world that was already a melting pot of cultures. For nearly 2 centuries, Indo-Greek kings, descendants of Alexander's generals, had ruled here, creating a unique blend of Greek and Indian traditions. The arrival of the Saka was about to bring that era to a violent close. The Saka fought differently than any army the local kingdoms had ever faced. Their real power was their cavalry. Saka warriors were masters of mounted archery, able to shower their enemies with arrows while on the move, a hit-and-run tactic that completely bewildered more traditional armies. Fighting alongside them were the cataphracts, basically ancient tanks on horseback. These were heavily armored shock troops, with both rider and horse decked out in scale armor, wielding massive lances. This 1-2 punch of mobile archers and heavy cavalry proved to be a winning combination. The first major Saka king to carve out a kingdom in India was Maois, who set up his power base in Gandhara around the 1st century BCE. His capital at Sirkap, near Taxila, became the heart of a new Indo-Scythian kingdom. The coins from his reign tell a fascinating story of this shift. They show him in a Greek style, but they also feature Indian gods, a clear sign of a new ruler trying to find his footing in a very complex cultural world. Mao's and the kings who came after him, like Aziz the Fern, took apart what was left of Indo-Greek power and pushed Saka control deep into northern India. They didn't just conquer, they adapted, setting the stage for an empire that would stick around for centuries. The Saka Empire at its zenith. Once they were in charge, the Saka didn't just act like foreign occupiers. Instead, they became experts at assimilation, creating a rich, blended civilization. They adopted the administrative systems they found, especially the Persian, model of satrapies. Their empire was less of a centralized monolith and more of a confederation, run by regional military governors called Kshatrapas, or satraps, with even more powerful great satraps ruling over huge territories. The most successful and longest-lasting of these were the Western Kshatrapas. From the 1st to the 4th century CE, they ruled a massive chunk of western and central India, including the wealthy regions of Gujarat and Malwa. Their control over key seaports on the Arabian Sea, like Baruch, plugged them directly into the incredibly profitable trade with the Roman Empire, which brought a staggering amount of wealth into their kingdom. This stability allowed for an amazing cultural fusion. The Saka, who likely originally practiced a form of Zoroastrianism, were incredibly tolerant of other faiths, giving money and support to both Buddhism and Hinduism. You can see this clearly in their art and coins. Coins of the Western satraps often show the king's portrait in a Greek style on one side and a Buddhist stupa or a Hindu symbol on the other. They became major patrons of Buddhist monasteries in places like Mathura and Gandhara, funding religious art that blended Greek, Persian, and Indian styles together. The absolute peak of Saka power and culture came under a king named Rudradaman I in the mid-2nd century CE. Rudradaman wasn't just a brilliant warrior who won back territory from rivals like the powerful Satavahana dynasty. He was also a huge supporter of the arts. His legacy is literally carved in stone at Junagadh, in a remarkable inscription from around 150 CE. It's written in perfect Sanskrit, one of the earliest major inscriptions ever found in the language, and it lists his military victories. But more famously, it records how he personally paid to repair the Sudarshana Lake, an ancient reservoir built by the Mauryan Empire after a storm destroyed it. He did this without raising taxes on his people, which sealed his reputation as a true protector and a model Indian king, even though he was of foreign descent. Rudradaman's reign shows the Saka had completed their transformation. They were no longer foreign invaders, but true patrons of Indian civilization. The story of the Saka is such a powerful reminder that history isn't static. It's constantly being shaped by people moving and cultures mixing. If you find these forgotten histories as fascinating as we do, take a second to subscribe to the channel and hit the notification bell. You won't want to miss our next journey into the stories of the other empires that shaped our world, decline and enduring legacy. But as is so often the case, the same pressures that created the Saka Empire would eventually tear it apart. Their biggest rivals were the Satavahana dynasty from the Deccan Plateau. For centuries, the two powers were locked in a series of brutal wars over control of Western India. Even though Rudradaman had beaten the Satavahanas twice, he spared their king because of a marriage alliance, a perfect example of how tangled war and diplomacy were back then. Later Satavahana kings, especially Gautamiputra Satakarni, came back with a vengeance, defeating the Saka ruler Nahapana and temporarily shattering Saka power in the area. Meanwhile, a new power was rising in the north, the Kushans, another group that had migrated from Central Asia. The Kushans eventually conquered the northern Saka territories, swallowing them into their own rapidly growing empire. Though they were weakened, the Saka kingdom of the Western Kshatrapas still managed to hang on for another 200 years. The final nail in the coffin came in the late 4th century CE. The powerful Gupta Empire, led by the ambitious emperor Chandragupta II, set its sights on the west. In a decisive war around 395 CE, Chandragupta II defeated the last Western Kshatrapa ruler, Rudrasimha III, and officially absorbed the kingdom into his own. After nearly 400 years, the age of Saka rule in India was over, but their legacy was already woven into the very fabric of Indian society. Maybe their most lasting contribution is the Saka-era calendar. It begins in 78 CE, and in 1957, it was adopted as the official national calendar of India. Their military innovations, especially in cavalry warfare, left a permanent mark on how Indian armies fought. Even Saka styles of dress, like trousers and tunics, were adopted and influenced local clothing. Through centuries of ruling, funding art, and assimilating, the Saka had stopped being outsiders. They had become a vital part of India's incredibly rich and complex story. From the steppe to the throne room, the journey of the Saka is an incredible story of how migration and cultural blending can reshape the world. They showed up as nomadic conquerors who tore down old kingdoms and shook up the established order. But over time, they became Indian rulers, patrons of Indian religions, and champions of Indian culture. They are a forgotten empire, not because they disappeared, but because their influence became so completely absorbed into the story of the subcontinent that it's now hard to tell where their legacy ends and India's begins. The echoes of the Saka horsemen are still there, in the art, traditions, and even the calendars of modern India. It's a quiet but powerful reminder of the nomads who rode out of Central Asia and forever changed a civilization. Thanks for joining us on this trip into the past. If you enjoyed it, please consider liking this video and sharing it with anyone else who loves a good historical deep dive. For more stories about the empires that time almost forgot, make sure you're subscribed. Until next time, stay curious.